Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Harold, happy birthday to you.
Who do you have to fuck to get a drink around here?
Well, you lied somewhere. Who is she?
What's more boring than a queen doing a Judy Garland imitation?
A queen doing a Betty Davis imitation.
Who was she?
You remind me of an old maid school teacher.
You remind me of a chicken wing.
Who does she hope to be?
What is he, a psychiatrist or a hairdresser?
Well, actually, he's both. He shrinks my head and then combs me out.
I lost my grip doing my chin-ups and I fell on my heels and twisted my back.
You shouldn't wear heels when you do chin-ups.
Well, there's one thing to be said for masturbation. You certainly don't have to look your best.
Hello, I'm film historian Tony Maeda.
And I'm Brad Shreve, who's just a guy who likes movies.
We discuss movies and television from Hollywood's golden age. We go behind the scenes and share our opinions, too.
And of course, being the average guy, my opinions are the ones that matter.
As does your self-delusion. Welcome to Going Hollywood. Brad, before we start, Brad, because I never see you, except when we're recording these podcasts, and I wanted to invite you to this birthday party that I'm going to. I was wondering if you'd like to go with me. You know, it's going to be a really tight group, about 9 guys. It's a very small get-together, and these guys they're a lot of fun. They can be a lot of fun, and it's at this fabulous apartment with this huge terrace that overlooks the city. So, would you like to go with me?
You know, Tony, I get such a rare opportunity to get into the city now that I live outside that I would love to come to one of your parties.
Oh, good. Well, it's not my party. It's for a friend of mine. It's his 32nd birthday.
Oh, he's old.
It'll be a lot of fun. But, I should probably mention, that, just a little caveat, there is the slightest potential for humiliation, emotional scarring, and devastation. But there'll be cake. So...
Well, hey, cake's all that matters. I can deal with the rest of it.
Happy Pride, everybody.
Happy Pride.
It's Boys in the Band. Did we give it away? Did we give it away too much there? Nothing to sing.
You know, with this podcast being relatively new, Tony and I were making all kinds of plans to, what episodes do we want to do when we brainstormed. And finally, Tony's like, wait a minute, it's Pride Month. We need to do a Pride Month episode. And so we have just enough time to get this one in. And what a good one to choose.
Well, I think we kind of have to. And I was also saying to Brad, too, it's kind of redundant that we're doing a Pride episode because so many of our episodes have gay references. But I feel it was really important that we do this landmark film for our very first Pride season. So I am very excited to be doing it. I really am, because I think it's a very, very, no matter how you feel about it, good or bad, there's no denying it's a landmark, and it needs to be discussed, I think.
And I have a couple things to say about it. I had mixed emotions when you said it. I immediately said, oh, God, we have to do it. It's a classic.
Right.
But if you remember, I said, well, what were you talking? I assumed you were talking about the 1970 film, but I didn't want to 100% assume that. I didn't want to watch the wrong thing. So I asked you, are we talking about the 70 film, the Netflix 2020 film, or are we doing both? And you were like, well, I only had in my head 1970. I said, that's fine. So I had mixed feelings when you decided that this would be a good idea, Tony. And the reason is I hate this movie. I've always hated this movie. It's disturbing. There's a lot about it I hate. So I said, when I sit down this time, I'm going to go with an open mind and put things in a different perspective. So I did that. And later I will share with you if my feelings about this movie have changed.
Okay, good.
But like any movie right now, I can tell you there are big pluses and big minuses, like any film. And we can certainly get into those along the way.
Yeah, I think this movie is important to do just for its landmark value. There's no getting around it whether you love it or whether you hate it. It was the first time that gay characters were seen as quote unquote normal people. Now, I know there's people who are going to give me an argument about what normal is, but anyway, that weren't aberrants of nature, that gay people were just like everybody else. It was the first time in a mainstream film. Obviously, there had been gay characters in films, and they usually were murderers or were murdered. Sebastian Venable getting eaten literally by a group of roving street urchins. So what's important about The Boys in the Band is that it was the first. And yeah, love it, hate it. It has that distinction. So I think that's why it's important for us to talk about. I have mixed feelings about this film as well. You know, it's funny because I was thinking about when was the first time I saw Boys in the Band, and regardless of what anyone might think out there, I did not see it in the theater in 1970. So the first time I saw it, I know was on VHS. It had been released on VHS, which was a horrible quality, horrible. But I had to see it because I heard so much about it. But I think I saw Cruising first. Okay, William Friedkin, for a supposedly straight man, and he was married 4 times, so I'm assuming he was straight, he directed the 2 most controversial films in gay cinema history, The Boys in the Band, and then 10 years later, Cruising.
Oh, someday we'll do Cruising, but I'll have to get my stomach ready for that.
I think I saw Cruising first, so Boys in the Band wasn't that scarring to me because nobody was being knifed to death in Boys in the Band. You know what I mean? So coming to Boys in the Band after seeing Cruising, it was like a breath of fresh air for me personally.
Queer people were protesting Cruising. I know people that tell me they were out there with their placards.
Well, queer people were protesting Boys in the Band.
Well, yeah, but Cruising was a flashback to basically gay men are all psychopaths.
Yeah, it's a hard film to watch. Maybe we can do it. We could do it sometime, but because I also don't think it's as bad as it was thought at the time. I really don't. I think there's some things about it which are interesting. So, you know, what I think is important about The Boys in the Band is its historical significance in cinema history. And that's really the reason I wanted to do it. Do you want to tell the people what this movie that we've been talking about now is about?
Absolutely. And I also have a description that I've seen online quite often. It's almost the exact same one in every site. I'm going to get to that later, but I'm going to give my description at first.
Mm-hmm.
Boys in the Band is a 1970 film based on a 1968 play by Mart Crowley. And to put this in perspective, the play came out the year before Stonewall, and therefore the movie came out, and I assume was being filmed during the time.
Interesting story
Stonewall.
there.
So this is pretty amazing time period.
Yes. You know what? Mart Crowley said the reason he wasn't at Stonewall, although I don't think he would frequent Stonewall, he probably would have been more for the townhouse, knowing Mart Crowley. They were filming The Boys in the Band, 20 blocks up from Stonewall when the rioting began. So that's kind of tells you what was going on. So The Boys in the Band began as one movie and ended as something very different.
And you mentioned that you think he'd hang out at the townhouse. I'm sure you know he did. In real life.
Yeah, did he really? That was a shot in the dark.
Yes. The apartment was based on an actress, and I'll have to find her name.
Tammy Grimes.
The exterior was actually filmed at her apartment.
Right. The daytime.
Right. But they could not get the cameras inside her apartment. It was too small. So they built a set that they say matched it. So pretty damn nice apartment, I'll tell you that.
Gorgeous apartments on the Upper East Side.
Nobody could afford that in New York today.
No. Certainly not. So what is this movie about?
Okay. So the movie is about a birthday party, and it is hosted by Michael. And Michael is for lack of a better word, I keep saying recovering alcoholic. He doesn't usually really use that term. He pretty much just says, I stopped drinking, but he's an alcoholic. You definitely learned that. He also is Catholic and seems to be struggling there. And he is hosting this party for his friend Harold. And I don't know what Harold does for a living. I don't think it's ever told. But Harold describes himself as an ugly, pockmarked Jew fairy. Right. Michael and all his friends are all stereotypes. And I don't see that as a negative because I'm firmly of the belief that stereotypes do exist for a reason. And every one of these individuals is a stereotype. But I can also say I know every one of these individuals.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's very true.
Yeah, I know every one of them. Michael is really struggling with his identity, though you would never know it at the beginning. He seems the most stable. Harold is very self-loathing, bitter in his own way. Emery is super flamboyant, the decorator.
Well, they are archetypes.
Yes.
I hear what you're saying. They are archetypes, but I think it's important to point out, and Mart Crowley has said this, and I wanted to get a little bit in the background of. I'm not going to talk a lot about the play, but it's important because basically what we're seeing when we see the film The Boys in the Band is the film version of the play. Because it has the exact same cast, almost all of the same dialogue. So I want to talk about that. But what Mart Crowley, when he would get criticized for saying it was a bad representation of gay culture, he's like, I'm not trying to represent gay culture. These are my friends. All of these characters were based on real people that Mart Crowley knew. Now, Harold, he was an ice skater. I don't think he's still ice skating, but you said you didn't know what he did. Harold was an ice skater. He was based on a very good friend of Mart Crowley's. Basically, what happened is, let me go ahead and give a little background about. Can I go ahead and give a little bit of background about how the Boys in the Band came about and about Mart Crowley?
Sure.
Let's go ahead and do that. So anyway, Mart Crowley grew up in the South and longed to be a playwright. He moved to New York when he was young, and he somehow found himself being a PA on the set of Splendor in the Grass, and being a PA primarily for Natalie Wood. And he and Natalie Wood became very close friends. And when Splendor in the Grass was over, Natalie Wood asked him to come back to Los Angeles with her and be her assistant. So he became Natalie Wood's assistant, and he was very much in the Hollywood scene of the 60s, which was a fabulous, fabulous time to be in Hollywood, I think. And he knew all these people, and he actually, one of the things that she said, if he came to Hollywood with her, she would get him a meeting with her agent at William Morris so he could get some work writing. And he actually wrote some screenplays, one of which was purchased by 20th Century Fox to star Natalie Wood. And Natalie Wood was going to play twins, one of the twins being a lesbian, which would have been incredible, but 20th Century Fox lost their nerve and it never happened.
Big surprise.
It's called Cassandra at the Wedding. Yeah, so Mart Crowley was kind of like a dilettante. He was in the room where it happened. He was with all these famous people. All these things were happening around him, yet he was not doing anything. And he began to get very depressed, and he began to drink. Well, he had this friend, this very good friend named Howard Jeffries, who was a dancer and worked on all the big musicals in the 60s. He was in Funny Girl. He was the groom in the bridal scene. He was in Hello, Dolly. He was a very, very accomplished dancer. And he took Mart to this birthday party that was full of, well, not full of gay men, a small birthday party of about a dozen gay men. And that was the first light bulb that went off in Mart Crowley's mind about what he could possibly write that spoke to him as a gay man. And he said that he was lying in bed and he was very depressed, and he just started writing lines, one after the other, and he just did this for days and days and days until he finally had a play that was based on the concept of a birthday party. It's Harold, who he based on his friend, Howard Jeffries. Harold's 32nd birthday. All of these men come together to wish him a happy birthday, and of course, the night. It turns into a long day's journey into night. It's just how it happens, how it degenerates. But here's what I have a problem with, and maybe you don't agree with this. I have been to parties like this. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe they didn't degenerate to the point that they degenerate to in the Boys in the Band, but there certainly was, it was something in the air that I knew this was turning quickly. I got to get out of here. So that's why when people say it's stereotypical, I don't know that that's necessarily true, or that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think these people exist.
When I say it's stereotypical, I meant the characters are stereotypes.
Okay.
And yeah, I guess you could say the situation is stereotypical, but I don't know if I thought that at first. The self-loathing is certainly heavy.
Yes.
Here's my challenge with this. So let me go back into the description that I've seen online, and this is where I have a challenge with this film. I'm reading, I don't remember where the source was, but it's almost identical to everything else I've seen. A witty, perceptive, and devastating look at the personal agendas and suppressed revelations swirling among a group of gay men in Manhattan. Harold is celebrating a birthday, and his friend Michael has drafted some other friends to help commemorate the event. Here's where I have the challenge. As the evening progresses, the alcohol flows, the knives come out, and Michael's demand that the group participate in devious telephone games unleash dormant and unspoken emotions. If that was this movie, I would like it better. That did not describe this movie. Those tensions and those antagonisms were right from the very beginning. They got worse as later goes on. Mm. You know, originally I didn't like this film because there was so much self-loathing. And then I looked at my own life and I'm like, God, I had self-loathing for a lot of years. This really, I relate to these people.
Yeah, it's pretty common. But,
you know, this is all before my time. But I've talked to guys in this era, and they said there were two things about it. One, it was scary because you never knew who to trust.
Yes.
But despite all that, and despite the pain and the suffering, when they got together, it was very painful, but there was also a lot of joy.
Yeah.
And they really look on that fondly. And I didn't see any of that in this movie.
Really?
And what I would have liked to see better, more, is in the beginning. Maybe it would have been longer, or I can think of a few things that could have been taken out, nothing major. I would have liked to have seen more of that joy and the campiness, because I think the camp was much more over the top then, because they had to express themselves somehow.
You don't think Emery was campy?
Well,
Connie Casserole. Oh, Mary, don't ask.
No. I would like to have seen more of that amongst the whole group. And they did a little bit of it. They did a little dancing. They did
the dance of Fire Island. Yeah,
reading each other and that kind of thing. To me, it went downhill way too fast. And it really started out with Michael and, is it Donald? Yes. Michael and Donald are friends, but there's that antagonism between them right from the beginning. So I wish it was a little more fun in the beginning and then pulled us into the pain.
Well, see, I find it so funny. It's no accident. The two inspirations that Mart Crowley looks to or mentioned as his inspirations for the play and for the film were Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Mm-hmm. Duh. I mean, it is the gay Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, if that's not redundant. I mean, the dialogue is that dense and cutting, and it can turn on a dime from outrageous comedy to tragedy, and that's Virginia Woolf, and that's The Boys in the Band. It's actually one of two plays that were put out on recording. I remember because I had both of them. They were actually made audio recordings on albums of Virginia Woolf and Boys in the Band, and it makes sense because they're like bookends. Mm. He also looked at Rope, the Alfred Hitchcock film. There's a play that the Alfred Hitchcock film is based on, because it takes place in real time, and The Boys in the Band also takes place in real time.
And if you've seen the movie Rope, the play is much more blatant. It's a gay couple. It's not hinted at. So
what I think is, I find it hysterically funny in the beginning. Because I don't know, these lines, they're so bright, they're so sharp. Their comebacks with each other. It's to me so intelligent and so literate, and I love that. And then the fact that it turns when Alan shows up, and suddenly these gay men are struggling within themselves whether or not to go back into their own closet, because when they're together at Michael's, they're themselves, and I find joy in that. When they did the dance of Fire Island, when they're kidding around with each other, that's them being free, and then suddenly the enemy shows up, the straight man shows up, and they question themselves. No, I'm not going to go back in my closet. I'm going to stand in my own space, and this man's entering our world. We're not going into his. And that's when it turns for me, and that's when it gets dark, but it's still bitterly funny, even in that darkness. I really realize you're right when you said that. I think I would like to have seen Alan come in, if nothing else, even 5 minutes later. Just give us a little more of that good time. Mm-hmm. I didn't laugh a lot through this, and I never have. I was reading the review of the 2018 Broadway, because it was originally off Broadway, and then 2018 they brought it back on Broadway. And I was reading the review of that. Right, finally made it to It finally made it to Broadway. Yes, it did. And they said the audience was saying the lines, the funny lines, before they were being spoken, and were laughing. And I'm like, there are some great funny lines in there, but to me they were so overshadowed by the pain. And maybe that's the part I'm missing, that you have that joy in the midst of pain. And that is part more what I got from it later on. Well, here's the thing. I mean, this play was written when we could still be arrested. Obviously, It was before Stonewall. What was Stonewall? Stonewall was the police coming in and raiding a bar to arrest people. So this play was written in a time. Now, here's the thing, though. In the mid-'60s, the culture was tearing. And what happens when things start to tear is other things start to seep in. Mm-hmm. So as the culture is tearing in the mid-'60s because of Vietnam, because of civil rights protests, suddenly there's a space opening up for these other things to happen, such as gay culture coming forward. So when the play was made, it was a very different time. It was still very oppressive. And the fact that these men could find a family with each other, no matter how dysfunctional you may think it may be, it was still a family. At the end of the play, after Harold absolutely decimates Michael with his words, and Michael is a heap. He's not quite a heap, but he's going to be a heap. He turns to me and says, call you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Now, think about, okay, yeah, that's a pretty dysfunctional friendship. Yes. Okay. But there's that sense of family there, that sense of love there that people have with people they're close to, and they allow themselves to be themselves with. So I find the joy in that, and I also find the pain in that, because I remember that, my own internalized struggles with my sexuality. I remember that pain, that self-loathing, that hatred. These people are personifying that.
Oh, yeah.
And it existed. It's a historic fact. Still exists.
And I agree. That's where I did connect, is when I really thought, wait a minute, you hated yourself just as much as these guys did. But again, what you described is not all that I saw. I wanted to see more of that in the film. As I said, I'm only going this from hearsay, from what men of that era have told me, is the joy and the love of their adopted family or their chosen family. And I would have liked to seen a little, but they also talked about the pain and the fear and everything else. And I would have liked to seen just a little more of that chosen family love before that pain that obviously still did exist as well came in. That's all I'm saying. Because it would have endeared me a little bit more to each of the characters. I get what you're saying. I wanted to care just a little bit more.
The characters are hard to like people. They're very complex characters. Michael, the character of Michael, who's played by Kenneth Nelson, was sort of kind of based on, Mart Crowley based him kind of on himself. Mart Crowley had issues with drinking. He became sober later in his life, and he just, God bless him, he died. He finally won the Tony Award for best revival of a play of The Boys in the Band, and he died a little bit later. He had a heart attack, which is sad because he was a very, very funny, wonderful guy. So Michael is based on Mart Crowley at that time. As I said, Harold is based on his friend, Howard Jeffries. And there are other, Donald was based on another dear friend. Donald was played by Frederick Holmes, who was the Matt Bomer character in the revival, and another good friend of his. So these were all friends of his, and he was showing the facets of all of his friends. I think what I want to say about this and the historical importance of both the play and the film. This play, first of all, had a very, I don't go into all the machinations of how it got on stage. It was a workshop that Edward Albee produced from the money he was making from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and because he didn't want to give it to the government. So he created this workshop, and it was for 5 nights. And the first night of the show, of the play, the house was half full. And this was in 1968. And the second night, the next morning after the first night, there was a line down the block of about 500 people waiting to see this play. So this play was huge. Played 5 performances in the workshop, and then it moved uptown to, I think, 55th Street, and played for 1,001 performances. So this play was big. And when the movie companies came to Mart Crowley saying that they wanted to buy it and make a film of it, because that was happening all the time, Mart Crowley did the most amazing thing. He turned down all these offers for lots of money because he knew that these studios would turn this into a Hollywood version and have these Hollywood actors in it. And he wanted to reward the brave actors who literally put their careers on the line to play these parts. Lawrence Luckinbill, who plays Hank, the one who was married but is bisexual and struggling with sexuality with Harry, said that they all lost their agents because their agents all told them, don't do this play. And they're like, we're going to do this play. It's a brilliant play. So anyway, he wanted to reward them.
I saw an interview. He said his wife at the time, Robin Strasser, she said, do you want to really do this? And he said, I do. And she said, okay, there goes your career.
Yeah.
She supported him, but it's just like, okay, there goes your career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was the thing. We talked a little bit about when I was acting and how I had to play it straight. I don't know how successful I was, but I mean, so can you imagine in the 60s when we could still be arrested? It wasn't good.
Yeah.
So Mart Crowley did this wonderful thing and said, these men need to be able to, I want a record of these men and these performances. So he went with a much smaller studio, Cinema Center Films, and the only thing that happened was they had to get a new director. They couldn't have Robert Moore because the studio said we can't have... Robert Moore was the original director of the play. And Robert Moore was the director who played Phyllis's brother on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the one who's gay, by the way. P.S. Cute little aside. So William Friedkin came in. He had just directed The Birthday Party, and he was one of these, one of the young Turks coming to Hollywood in the early 70s, like Alan Pakula and Martin Scorsese, who revolutionized film business. And he used these actors were able to create the roles they created on stage in film for posterity. Now, here's the sad thing, is that most of them never hit the same heights again. Is it because of the characters they played? Is it because of this film? Did this film taint it? I don't know. They all worked after this film. I mean, Lawrence Luckinbill had a very illustrious career. He just wrote his memoir.
I think other than Robert Letourneau, who played Cowboy, the others did okay.
They did okay, but they felt...
He just kind of vanished after 74.
They felt very confined. They felt very stereotyped. In particular, Cliff Gorman, who plays Emery, probably the bravest of them all. And Cliff Gorman was heterosexual.
Yeah.
He was not gay. Cliff Gorman went on to play Lenny Bruce. He won a Tony Award for playing Lenny Bruce in the play version of Lenny, which was later made by Dustin Hoffman as a film. He was very angry about what Emery did to his career. A lot of these actors, Robert Letourneau was as well. Robert Letourneau played Cowboy. Mart Crowley saw him at a tea dance on Fire Island and said to Robert Moore, "That's Cowboy." And he was a soap actor. And he was very bitter about it, although I don't know if he would have had such a stellar career without the boys in the band or not. But a lot of these people, Leonard Fry was a great actor. He did Fiddler on the Roof. After this, he was nominated for an Academy Award for that. He was also a very good-looking guy. He's not at all like Harold. He's not like the ugly, pockmarked Jew fairy he plays in this film. It's a brilliant character.
If you think of the newer version, I think Zach Quinto is very handsome, and he looked like Harold in the newer version. So
yeah, exactly. So these are two very good-looking guys who definitely changed their appearance to play this part. And Peter White was on All My Children for like 30 years playing Link. I remember him from All My Children as a kid. I'm like, because the first time I saw the boys in the band, I went, "That's Link from All My Children." So yes, they worked. Kenneth Nelson moved to London and did work in London on the London stage for the rest of his life as well. So they all worked, but they didn't really hit the heights that this play promised, I guess is the great way to say that.
You mentioned Cliff Gorman being so brave to play Emery, who was the most flamboyant of the bunch. When I was reading the article that Cliff Gorman and his wife took care of Robert Letourneau when he was dying of AIDS, I'm like, his wife? I'm like, that had to be a typo. So I dug into it. I'm like, he was straight. Oh my goodness. I couldn't believe it.
It's a little surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
Speaking of stereotypes, you talked about stereotypes, and I do have my issues with his portrayal of Emery, Cliff Gorman's portrayal of Emily. I mean, you can draw a line. First of all, you can draw a line from Emery all the way down to Jack McFarland at Will and Grace. I mean, hello. Same trajectory, same character. You can see the beginnings of it. I feel like, and Friedkin has said this too, William Friedkin said this, he feels like he should have toned Cliff Gorman down a little bit. They were all theatrical, first of all. When William Friedkin agreed to direct this, he wanted 3 weeks of rehearsal. And they were all like, What? We've been doing this show for 1,001 performances. We do not need to rehearse. But he had to rehearse them to bring them down for film. Now, they're still all very theatrical. I think that's another criticism that people have of this film.
Yes.
It's very theatrically presented because it is based on a play, but there are ways to do it. Virginia Woolf is a prime example. Virginia Woolf is an incredibly theatrical play, but a wonderfully cinematic film. I don't look at Virginia Woolf, the film, and think, well, first of all, Elizabeth Taylor was not a theater actress, so there you go. Right now, you have a film actress. Mm-hmm. So maybe if they had gotten film actors to do this, it would be different. But yes, it's a very theatrical presentation, and they're all just slightly bit too theatrical. Same thing with Kenneth Nelson. I think he's just a bit too theatrical. Needs to just dial it down just a bit. But then, I don't know, maybe that's the essence of the play. Maybe it isn't.
I agree with you. I actually think it was, I'm not going to say mistake. I didn't notice the difference. I don't want to go back and forth between the new Netflix version and this version, but I'm going to bring it up because I didn't really notice the theatricality of the original movie until I watched the Netflix series. And I'm not going to say the Netflix series was better because it's not. But there were some, when I was looking at the casting choices in the different characters, I thought some were better in 70s, some were better in the newer one. But one thing I noticed is I felt like the characters were more real in the newer version. And I realized it's because the other guys are on stage.
Exactly.
And especially Gorman. He was playing.
Exactly.
I felt like I was watching somebody play. I was watching an actor. I felt like I was watching an actor every time he was on. I didn't buy him.
You just hit the nail.
He was the character that I felt the least connected to.
You just hit the nail on the head with that, which is what I was going to say. The interesting thing about the Netflix is it was the exact opposite problem. You have TV and film actors, Matt Bomer, Jim Parsons, Zachary Quintero, who are TV and film now having to play on stage. Because I saw the Broadway version of the Netflix.
Oh, did you?
This was I saw it in New York with the same cast. And they had the reverse problem that the original actors had. The original actors had to bring down their performances, and the ones on the Netflix had to bring them up for the stage. So it makes sense that when you're watching the Netflix one, that's their comfort zone.
Yeah.
They're all TV and film actors, so they can do that. It's the exact opposite with the film version. And I think they all did a fantastic job, by the way. I really don't. Like I said, I have some problems with Cliff Gorman, but that's more of a directing thing. William Friedkin should have said to him, bring it down a little bit, bring it down a little bit. But he didn't. He wanted to capture this outrageous performance of Emery.
Tony, I'm stopping our conversation real quick.
Why? Brett, we're in the middle of a podcast.
But this is about the podcast, and it's very important.
Okay.
Listener, whatever app you're listening on, whether it's on the computer or on the phone, reach your finger or your mouse over. It usually says follow. Some still say subscribe. And click that. And what's going to happen when they do that, Tony?
They're going to get notified when a new episode is available, and they can listen to us again. You don't want to miss that.
No.
Can we get back to the episode that we were recording?
Of course.
Please?
Of course.
All right. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe and follow.
There you go. I have a question about Robin DeJesus, who played Emery in the Netflix version.
Mm-hmm.
I believe I've seen him in other things. He is a flamboyant man. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, I think he was in Tick, Tick, Boom.
Okay, I know I saw Tick, Tick, Boom not too long ago, but I don't remember his
The Jonathan
character.
Larson thing?
Yeah, I know. I saw it because I really like Andrew Garfield as an actor. I believed him as Emery. I didn't feel like he was acting like Emery. The other guy felt like was acting like
I've seen quite a few productions of this play. And Emery's always the tricky one. Emery can really divide people. You need a very, very technically skilled actor to play Emery. Otherwise, it comes off, especially now because we've had, all I said, the Jack McFarlanes, we have this idea, he's such a stereotype now. It's a very tricky part to play, and I think Robin DeJesus did an incredible job.
Yes, I agree.
I also love the fact that they made him, he wasn't this white gay guy anymore. They gave him, he's a man of color, and I loved that they did that with that show, with that particular performance.
And I think until somebody knows an Emery, they will think Emery is a gross stereotype.
Yeah, but there are people like Emery.
Oh, I know Emery.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I know several.
So when people
Emerys.
criticize this play about, the stereotypes in it, but they're real. There are people who are like this.
And they're also full of drama.
Exactly. So I have a real problem when people say, oh my God, they're so stereotypical. Oh my, these people exist. They were.
Every one of these people exists in my world.
Yeah. I said it, and I have been to parties that could have easily degenerated into a party almost as bad as this. So I think those criticisms they're all out there. There's some validity to some of them and not so much to others. That's the way I feel about it.
So let's talk about Cowboy.
Okay. Robert Letourneau.
I love his character. I'm very sad for his character. They are brutal.
It's a very sad character, isn't it?
Yes. He is, I don't know. He's basically a hustler. He was hired for $20 for the night.
No, he was not basically a hustler. He's a hustler. He's not basically a hustler. He finds him on 42nd Street. He's a hustler.
Okay, yeah. He's a hustler, yes. And he's not the brightest one that you've ever met. So he's hired for $20 for the night, which sounds like pretty good money back then. He was a birthday present from Emery to Harold, the birthday boy.
Right.
He is very dense, sometimes a little bit to the point of absurdity, but that's okay. He was still a fun character. But the others are so brutal to him.
Yeah.
Just so cruel and so condescending.
They are.
And it'd be okay if it was a joke here and there. But my God, they just didn't let up.
Well, there's a certain amount of jealousy there.
Well, there is. That's exactly what I felt. First of all, there was the jealousy.
Yeah.
And there was also the contempt that he didn't have the culture that they had. So it was a little of both.
Well, I mean, that's such a gay thing. I mean, that jealousy. What does Harold say? You know, this poor boy, his transitory beauty. Beauty's so transitory, you know, but you'd give up everything for just a little bit of that transitory beauty, wouldn't you, Michael? I mean, I just paraphrased the hell out of it, but that's basically what
It's so tragic what
he's saying.
His face is so tragic, referring to the fact that it's going to become tragic.
Yes, what a tragedy this boy's face is. Yeah, I mean, but I know lots of gay men who talk that way,
yes.
who behave
Yes.
that way. You know what I mean? There's a real jealousy. It's the same thing. It's you know, what doesn't Michael say that fags are worse than women about growing older? And
Yes.
to them, growing older is 30.
Yes.
Fags think their life's over at 30. And I'm sorry for dropping the F word, but, you know, that's what they say in the play. So
I don't want to dance around that either.
yeah.
And, you know, one thing I'm glad that's not true as much anymore. There are still guys in their 20s that are like, oh, God, anybody over 30 is might as well be dead. But what I like is that guys over their 30s and guys in their 40s and guys in the 40s, 50s and 60s no longer feel like they're dead. I think they did back in the older days.
Well, I hope not. I mean, I hope that we get to the point. We're also in a different age, but I hope we've gotten to the point in our lives, or we get to the point in our lives where we realize we do get better as we get older and we don't behave the way we do. I always think it's funny that they think, I mean, these are all men clearly are in their 30s. You know, I always think it's funny that Harold's only 32 because looks a little bit older than 32 if you ask me. But that's one thing I like about the revival is that I don't think they play up on that as much. But, you know, youth culture, gay culture is no different than everybody else's culture in that youth culture rules. And here is this young boy. Think about Cowboy for a minute. You know, you think about a hustler in Times Square, you think of, what's his name from Midnight Cowboy? You think of like, not Ratso Rizzo, he wasn't the hustler, but Joe Buck, John Voight's character, and same kind of thing. You know what I mean? This is a kid who's trying to make his way in life, who's maybe not the smartest, doesn't have the tools that these other men do, and he's invited into this viper's nest of a birthday party. And you know what? He comes out, he's the only one, basically, other than Donald, who doesn't play the game, who doesn't come out humiliated. You know, Bernard, Emery, they're all, well, Hank and Larry don't either because they have that kind of come together moment. But I mean, he's just kind of like observing it. And actually, he comes out in the end in the best because he's going to make some money.
Yeah.
He's got to go to bed with Harold, but he's going to make some money, which I think is interesting. You know, there was a scene that was cut that was not in the play that they wanted to film in which there was a kiss between Hank and Larry after they have their makeup and they go upstairs to Michael's room. And Larry is walking towards the door and goes inside. And Michael says, "What do you think's going on up there?" to Alan. And there was actually a scene they filmed it. The actors were very ambivalent about it. First, they agreed to do it, and then they didn't want to do it. And then William Friedkin said, "Let's just shoot it and see if we need it." And it was a scene of them kissing. And they filmed it, and they realized that they really didn't need it. It was superfluous.
No, it would detract from it.
It was not important to the story. But it's interesting that these actors, again, so brave. How brave were these actors? I was saying earlier about, and they are, you know, Matt Bomer, Jonathan Bailey, being so brave for doing these roles now. Think about that in the mid-'60s. How brave these actors were to do these parts. And of these 9 actors, 6 identified as gay men, and 6, and the director, Robert Moore, of the play, died of AIDS.
Actually, Reuben Green died of a heart attack.
Well, he disappeared. Nobody knows where he is. He's still alive.
Oh, because
somewhere.
I have found very mixed stuff on him. So yeah, you could be right. Because I found that he's missing. I found that he died 20 years ago. I found that he died 10 years ago. So yeah, I'll take your word that he's still missing. Yeah.
William Friedkin said he hasn't heard from Reuben Green. Reuben Green plays Bernard. He's the only African-American character. And he was a model. He wasn't an actor. He was a model. He did this part. He did a couple other TV shows. And then he distanced himself from this film and kind of just disappeared. All the cast members, the surviving cast members, say they have had no contact with him, don't know where he is or what he is. So if he's alive, if he's dead, who knows? But, you know, the plain truth is that Kenneth Nelson, Leonard Fry, Frederick Combs, Keith Prentice, Robert Letourneau all died of AIDS. That is one of the most devastating devastating legacies of this film.
Yeah.
I think it's terribly sad.
I'll tell you, when I was looking at each of these cast members, and Kenneth Nelson, I saw he died at 63 and 93. And like 93 and 94 were the two biggest years for AIDS deaths in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Leonard Fry, 49 and 88. Keith Prentice, he was 52 and 92. I started looking at these ages and looking at these years, and my heart was sinking because I knew before I saw how they died.
Right?
And sure enough, every one of them died of AIDS-related death. And it just, I've shared before that I was removed because of where I lived and being in the closet at the same time. AIDS was this thing that went on elsewhere. It was that thing that was out there that people were talking about. And to watch these characters, and much as I say they irritate the hell out of me, I grew to like these characters at the same time. And then afterwards to see that these actors who I liked their characters and I respected that they were able to do this, to see almost all of them died of AIDS,
it's devastating.
I was actually in tears. I was in tears.
It really is the gut punch epilogue to this film.
Well, when my friends tell me that we're out at that time, and they say they lost almost everybody they knew, well, that's kind of an abstract thing.
It is.
But then I look at this movie and see all these guys are gone.
I thought the same thing.
And I'm like, oh.
I thought that's such an abstract concept. And then you see it in front of you.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
That six of the people in this production we lost to this plague. And I think that, I do not agree with cancel culture at all. Obviously, if somebody does something heinous, like breaks a law, that's one thing. That's not cancel culture. When people talk about this film, what's the very famous saying? Those who ignore history are bound to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
If people think that we are safe in this world and we in our wonderful lives where we can get married now and adopt children and have wonderful Sunday fun days out partying, if they don't think that can change and we can go back to a time in the 60s when this play was put on, they're crazy.
Yeah.
So that's why I say, you don't cancel The Boys in the Band. You look at it and you say, pay attention, because we have to fight for this every day. Otherwise, we end up right back here. And I feel the same way with AIDS. Obviously, I just got off AIDS life cycle, so I'm a little bit on my soapbox here. People think AIDS is over. It ain't over. It ain't over. People are still getting HIV. Now, maybe they're living with it, but they have to take very strong medications for the rest of their lives. I'm not going to turn this into an HIV podcast either. But what I'm saying is that pisses me off when people say negative things about this film and want to forget about it and erase our culture. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And these men are a living example.
I was reading in a Facebook group these very similar statements being made about Philadelphia and how it's
absolutely
so outdated and was so. And boy, I jumped in on that. I said, "Look, I just talked to Ron. Let me tell you what I think."
Good.
And I don't know if I set them straight. I will say one thing I'm really happy happened. I'm sure a lot of people were really upset that Ryan Murphy and Netflix decided to remake this film. Because it is a classic, and people hate it when classics are remade.
Mm-hmm.
But what I love about it is they've reached an audience that never would have gone and watched this 1970 film.
I agree with you.
They never would have looked at anything, but they say, "Oh, Matt Bomer's in it, and this guy's in." They're on Netflix, and they saw a film that they never would have seen otherwise.
I agree with you. And I have my issues with Ryan Murphy.
Oh, I do.
And some of the things he does. But what I love about that is that it was a Broadway play first. He put it on Broadway where it finally, what a win. Thank God that Mart Crowley lived to see his creation on Broadway where it should have always been, and then to win the Tony Award as Best Revival, and then to have it open to a wider audience on Netflix is wonderful.
Yeah.
Mart Crowley didn't, after this, he kind of went back to his dilettante life. You know what I mean? He was very much like Michael. He was traveling from city to city, and the only place he was ever happy was on the goddamn plane. And it wasn't until Natalie Wood came to his rescue once again with Robert Wagner, by now they were remarried, and said, "Would you come to LA and work on Heart to Heart?" And he produced Heart to Heart. And then, of course, the tragedy with Natalie Wood happened. And what's interesting about Mart Crowley is Mart Crowley did write a sequel. Did you know there was a sequel to this play, Boys in the Band?
No, I had no idea.
Yeah. He wrote a sequel in 2002 called The Men from the Boys. And this is what's kind of interesting about that. So he's written it post-AIDS. The characters all get together for the funeral of Larry, who hasn't died of AIDS. He's died of pancreatic cancer. It had its premiere in San Francisco, and it just never went anywhere. I think it's interesting that he didn't address the AIDS crisis. If you're going to address it, maybe it's because of these friends of his that he lost due to the crisis, and he didn't want to revisit that so literally. So maybe he made it pancreatic cancer. But I find that really interesting that he wrote the sequel that totally did not deal with the AIDS crisis.
Interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that is really interesting.
I don't know. I don't know why he didn't do that. But maybe it's because he lost these dear people. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how this film did when it was released?
Well, I do, and that's the numbers are a little odd, so maybe you can help me with some of this. First of all, I do want to talk about the play, because you mentioned the play.
Sure.
Lawrence Luckinbill said he went and cashed, he was in a soap opera, I guess, did a little role at the time, and he went and cashed his check that he made at the soap opera, and he passed the theater and he saw the line that you said it was way down, going down the street with 500 people.
Yeah.
And he initially thought the theater was burning down. So instantly it was popular then. And then the budget for this film is pretty amazing to me, because given the time, the topic and the time. Now I'm getting two different numbers. IMDb said this movie cost $1.3 million to make. Mm-hmm. Every other source I see, including the movie database, is $5.5 million. Either of those numbers are pretty astounding when you consider that MASH was $3.5 million to make. Mm-hmm. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, $6 million to make. Now, there were other bigger hits, but those were hits that were made on what today we would consider a very low budget. And this movie wasn't that far behind, really, especially if the $5.5 million is accurate.
Yeah.
So the fact that it was given that much money, I don't know where it came from. You may know.
It was Cinema Center Films, which CBS owned, which was a CBS company.
Okay.
But I saw those figures too. And I got to tell you, I'm wondering, $5.5 million in 1970 was a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
For a one set film. This film takes place on one set. There were exteriors, fabulous exteriors of New York in the late 60s on the Upper East Side. There was a shot in Julius's bar in the West Village, which they replicated in the Ryan Murphy version, which I love. And Mart Crowley's in the bar scene. So if you watch it again, look for Mart Crowley. He's against the window. So yeah, I find it difficult to believe that they spent $5.5 million on this. I
agree with you. And I will say that I looked at five big hit movies from 1970, and the IMDb dollar amount matched all these other sites verbatim. This was the only one that I saw a huge discrepancy. Mm-hmm. And I, like you, I'm leaning more towards, they used somebody's real patio and then they built a one set.
Yes, exactly.
I am leaning towards more believing the 1.3 million, which to me still is pretty big deal.
These actors were not getting $1 million salaries either.
What would have been just a very cheap indie film that nobody would have saw normally.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with the other thing. And it because of its subject matter, it had very limited release. Obviously, it played in New York, it played in Los Angeles, it played in the cities, but it wasn't about to play in Peoria, or Omaha. So it's the fact that the figures I got of it made $3.5 million, which seems a little more in line with, if it cost about $1 million, $2 million to make, then it made a small profit, which was a win, considering it had such limited release. But here's the interesting thing about this, and I kind of alluded to it before about how this movie was being filmed 20 blocks away from Stonewall at the same time. This movie went into production, in 1969 as a groundbreaking event. By the time it was released, and we're talking about a year, it was suddenly retrograde. It was suddenly, somebody called it the gay Uncle Tom's Cabin. That is how much society changed in the year between beginning of this film and the time it was released. So this film really kind of got a bum rap in that respect. And when they had the revival of it, the very first revival in 1996 off Broadway, which I also saw, Ben Bradley began his review with, "I guess it's okay to like The Boys in the Band again, because it got a really bad rap, because people didn't want to be pushed back into the closet. And so many people thought this film represented the closet. Well, it did, because it takes place in a time where the closet was still very much a reality. And that's the criticism of this film. I think you have to, as I said before, you have to separate that, and you have to look at this as the historic time capsule of an era, and hope to God we don't ever go back to that era again.
I agree. And you know what? I can totally see why all that happened. This was just really bad timing for this 1 year for this film.
Yeah.
Because this was filmed before Stonewall. It came out after Stonewall. All of a sudden, we're out, and we're not all miserable, and we're not all psychopaths. And, you know, nobody was saying we're just like you, because everybody wanted to emphasize they weren't, but they were still okay. But, you know, when I say everybody, I'm always generalizing.
Mm-hmm.
I could see why somebody at that point were like, okay, we're getting out of that. And now, oh, look, there we're miserable again. I could see why somebody at that point would say, oh, why, no.
Yeah.
I can understand why that happened. It was bad timing.
It was unfortunate. And that could be another reason why these actors' careers didn't exactly skyrocket the way that you think they would have when you're a part of this groundbreaking film. Think of Virginia Woolf, you know. They all got nominated for Oscars for Virginia Woolf. This movie got nominated for no Oscars. Now, I'm not saying that Oscars necessarily equate with a good film, but, you know, they're a good barometer for it. And there were no Oscar nominations for this film, and this film just kind of went away. You know, it just kind of died. It was the urban myth of this, you know, of this, not this terrible film, but this film that paints us in such a bad light. And what I love is, with the revivals in 96 and 2018 and the Netflix, and then they just recently released this film on DVD in a beautiful, pristine condition. The colors are gorgeous. This film is being looked at as with the respect it deserves. This film deserves the respect of every single gay man, every single queer person who watches it, because it was the first. It might not be the best, but it said it before anybody else had the guts to say it and put it out there for all the world to see. So for that reason, I will always applaud Boys in the Band. Always.
And I will now get to you what my feeling is, because I told you what my feeling was about this movie before I watched it.
Uh-oh.
And I said, I'm going to watch it with an open mind.
Gird your loins, people.
No, actually, it's good. I still find it disturbing. It was much more disturbing than I anticipated. I thought, okay, you know what I was thinking in the past? No, it hurt me a lot more than I expected. But I have a huge respect for this movie. And I didn't know how to verbalize it until I read it in, it may have been Washington Blade. I don't know where I read this. That what this movie did, before this movie, gays were always depicted as the psychopath or the depressed, the sick individual. They were sick.
Right.
And this movie was the first, or at least the first to garner attention, that said, we're not gay because we're sick. We're sick because we're gay, because of how society treats us.
Ooh.
If we're unhappy, it's because of society, not because of who we are or what we are.
That's beautifully put, Brad. I was almost going to have a quick comeback, like, why don't you not tell me about it? But I like that. That's very beautifully put.
Yeah, and it's very true.
It is very true. This movie may not receive the glory you love, but it sure as hell deserves your respect.
Exactly. It's not a movie I want to sit down and just relax and watch. It's not that at all.
No.
But I do have a huge respect for the film. Absolutely.
And I don't think any film can ask for more than that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's great. I think we just did The Boys in the Band. How about that?
I think we did.
Thanks, everybody. We still need an ending. Oh, I think I always wanted to mention, okay, I should have mentioned this before. We have a playlist on Spotify that Brad has created and I add to for all the songs that I can't sing on this podcast. You can go to our Spotify, to Going Hollywood podcast, and listen to some of the wonderful songs that we talk about from a lot of these movies that we discuss.
And we pick and choose. I was putting whole playlists, and I realized, no, there's not all of that's good. So we do pick and choose from the film.
You were. I looked at the one you did for Fellow Travelers. I was like, Jesus, man. How many songs?
Yeah, I took all those out. I took only the ones that had vocals in them.
Yeah, it's fun, though. So give it a listen. And don't forget to rate and review us, please. Oh, one last thing. Thank you to all the people who have rated and reviewed us, given us 5 stars. That's really lovely. You know, Brad and I, it may not be hard to believe, but Brad and I have other jobs that we do. We're both incredibly busy people. And this podcast for me, and I hope I speak for Brad, is truly a labor of love. And to have your positive feedback and to have your encouragement means the world to us. And I just want to say thank you for that, for everybody who's taken the time to give us a 5-star rating or to write a review. It's fabulous. So thank you very much, everybody. And for listening always.
Podcasting is a lonely business because we sit here and we talk on microphones, we see each other, but then it goes out in the world and we may see people are listening to it or whatever, but that's it. Unless you let us know, you're just numbers and we don't want that.
And we appreciate it.
I don't care about the numbers. I want to hear what your thoughts are. And actually, there's a way you can. If you'd like to tell us your opinion of the show or would love to hear what your opinions are of the movies and our thoughts on them, in the show notes of every episode, it says, text us your opinion or comment. Text it to us. We can't respond, but we will read it to you on the air. So make sure you tell us your name.
Yeah. And if you want to give us a suggestion of a film to watch, we were just talking about what our film choices would be. Let us know. I mean, that would be a lot of fun too.
That would be a lot of fun. Yes.
Thanks, everybody.